Should I get started, Marika?
Yes, so once more, welcome to Arctic Europe Tourism Cluster AETC Tech Week. And for this entire week, we will be having a lot of deep divings into the digital world. And we're kicking this Tech Week off with Nicole Pagels from Nordic Tourism Collective. And she's here to talk to us about making sense of cybersecurity in tourism. And I believe that many of us, we know each other beforehand. If not, my name is Marika Tiikkaja. I am one of the project managers for Arctic Europe Tourism Cluster project, which is funded by Interreg Aurora by the European Union. So if you'd have any questions concerning our project or our topic today at hand, do approach within the chat box, and maybe in the chat box, if you have any questions, I will read them also out loud to our expert, Nicole, and maybe we will have some time for questions and answers in the end. But without further ado, I would like to give the virtual floor to you, Nicole. So do go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marika. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you for inviting me, and great to see so many familiar faces and names. You're all hidden on the call, but also new ones. So lovely to meet you all. So I'm here today to help us all make sense of cybersecurity in tourism, a big topic, but hopefully one that after today won't feel so big for everybody. For those of you who haven't yet met me, my name is Nicole Pagels. Everybody calls me Nikki unless I'm in trouble. I like to call myself a travel tech enthusiast. I'm a bit of a geek and love everything to do with technology. And I'm here today on behalf of the Nordic Tourism Collective, where I run a program called Tech Matters. It's a platform that brings together all of the different travel segments within the Nordic tourism industry in topics of technology. So whether it's bringing forward the great innovation that happens in our countries, or just discussing different types of technologies that are affecting our industry, we like to kind of bring it all into the very heart of the tourism industry. A bit of background about myself. I have a 25-year travel industry background. I've worked in OTAs, I've worked in wholesalers. You'll hear on my accent that I've lived in London for many years. I've also worked with international hotel chains like Hilton, a few private equity firms, particularly within the Generation Z space, and most recently within technology, primarily hotel booking technology. Now, just to give you an idea about my age, I started off with faxes back in my early days as a tour guide up in Lapland. And I've lived through quite a few technology revolutions. Cybersecurity has always been a part of everything that we talk about. Within our industry, we've always wanted to protect our businesses, but also wanted to make sure that we stay on top of cybersecurity trends. And one of the pieces that I'll be deep diving into today is obviously the big revolution that we're seeing now in AI and artificial intelligence. On the agenda, we have quite a packed session. So I'm going to be taking a look at some recent attacks that have kind of shaped our tourism industry in the form of cyber attacks. I'll be taking a look at that from a global scale, but also applying it to the Nordics and what kind of attacks we've seen on our shores. I'll then be deep diving into the history of cybersecurity. And this is just to get everybody onto the same page to understand kind of where it all began and where are we now. The main part of my session will then be about cybersecurity within travel and tourism, and particularly taking a look at the Nordic focus and the Arctic focus. What are the biggest risk areas for us, and why are we so lucrative to cyber criminals? And then finally, I'm going to be having a little look at kind of what this AI-powered world is doing for us in cybersecurity, what we can expect both from cyber criminals, but also how we can use these new technologies to help protect us. I am holding a security workshop also tomorrow. So there I will finish off this session with a quick overview on what's to come tomorrow as well. So I can see still people joining the session. So welcome to everybody that I haven't said welcome to yet. But let's get going. So, a glimpse into recent attacks. What is going on around the world today? What are the most prominent global attacks in tourism, and particularly what is happening in the Nordics? Now, I have a video to show you. We did test this with Marika earlier. So Marika, please unmute yourself if it doesn't work properly, and I'll walk you through it instead. It's a bit difficult sometimes with lots of people online, but let's see.
I think we are not getting the sound on this video.
Okay. In that case, what I'll do is I will whiz forward and you will get this video later on. This is a video that takes a look at, first of all, Indian news from this year, looking at cyber crimes that have happened in Kerala, in Goa, where phishing attacks have led to a whole stack of bogus bookings. It then goes into airports and what happened during the summer this year at Heathrow, in Brussels and in Berlin, with a cybersecurity kind of attack that caused massive chaos during the summer holiday period. It then looks at a cybersecurity attack that was back in 2021 with the Marriott chain internationally. And most recently, what's happened with Qantas and another piece of chaotic cyber attack there. Now, that video will be made available to everybody, and it's easier when you download the recording to watch it yourselves to kind of paint a picture of what's going on globally. Safe to say that cyber attacks are being reported almost monthly in some part of the world within our industry, also here in the Nordics. So if we take a look at the biggest pieces of news that have kind of hit our area, back in 2021, I'm sure you'll all remember, the Nordic Choice Hotels was hit with a ransomware attack, where at the time they were operating some 200 hotels in Scandinavia. They were attacked by a group called the Conti Group, where reservation data, check-in data, and payment data was affected and leaked. The details of the actual ransomware and the ransom that was paid to get all of that data back is undisclosed, but one that was very well brought forward in all news channels. Then there was one by the travel in 2024 that hit travel retail Norway, so airport retail. This was a cyber attack that hit duty-free and tax-free retails across all major Norwegian airports. And then perhaps most televised is what's happened to our airlines. So in 2021, SAS was hit with a really big attack. Again, this was a hacktivist group called Anonymous Sudan that planted a piece of ransomware in their systems. Finnair has also reported several breaches over the past couple of years. One of them was a service partner breach where basically a frequent flyer program let in some hackers that compromised some 200,000 clients. Luckily, in this case, it was only names, numbers, seating organizations, and maybe also meal requests that had been compromised, but nonetheless one to flag. And most recently, they've also reported GPS interceptions for flights between Finland and Estonia. And these are just examples of some of what's happened on the Nordic market in the past 5 years. So, where did all of this begin and where are we now? What is the history of cybersecurity and why is this such a big deal for our industry? This little bit is really to kind of give us an overview as humans into why we need to be protecting our computers. So if we rewind to the beginning of computers back in the 1950s all the way through to the 1970s, the beginning of computing started in a room. You had a massive computer that filled almost a full room, and cybersecurity at that time was really kind of non-existent because you needed to do a physical break-in to compromise any of those computers. And oftentimes, because they were very expensive, it had to do with the actual hardware itself. Then we fast forward into the 1980s and the 1990s, and that's where this picture comes from as well. And that's when the first personal computers started to emerge on the market. Now, these came into our businesses, they also came into our homes, and they allowed us to start to build things called IT networks, where basically computers started sharing information with each other. Our processing power and storage power also increased, and the internet was born. Perhaps most prominent here to highlight is that computing at this time became accessible to a wider audience, so it became more cost effective. Computers weren't as expensive and they weren't as clunky, so they didn't need full rooms. You could have them anywhere. In the 1980s, the kind of bad guys, if we say it that way, weren't really organized as such until kind of towards the 1990s, really. At the time, when we take a look at cybersecurity incidents, a lot of the time it was students or other just kind of tech geeks trying to prove that they could get into these systems. You did have some level of professionalism within governments where you had government-led hacks that had a political agenda. This still happens today. And the very first hack group started to emerge towards the end of the 1980s. I'm sure some of you remember Hackligan, for instance, in Sweden. And the types of breaches that we saw at the time were really viruses and worms. Now, some of these terms, viruses, we still talk about today, but worms we've kind of let go of because they have evolved. But at the time, worms were basically infections that could spread across IT networks to several computers at once, whereas viruses at the time were ones that had to be planted into one computer, and this often came through a floppy disk or something like that. What happened as a result of the personal computer hitting the scene was that we started to see, obviously, the first cyber attack court cases with actual hack leaks starting to pop up across our industry and also in our area. We also started to see the very first computer emergency response teams, and these came primarily from the US, but very rapidly spread across the world. And the very first antivirus software companies were born, like McAfee, for instance, which many of us still use today. Now, those first antivirus software companies took a lot of storage. They could only counter viruses that they knew, and they kind of had to be updated by floppy disks. So quite a manual process, but that was the very beginning of how we started to protect our computers. Now, if we fast forward to the following decade, we start to look at the 1990s and the 2000s and a rapid improvement in everything to do with computing. So data storage capacity increased. We had faster networks. We went away from that dial-up, that dring dring sound. Mobile devices started to appear, and more tech was used in general at home and in business. Perhaps most prominent here, we had a widespread use of email that started across the board, and this was both personally as well as also in business. And websites started to gain traction in all areas. So not just large websites, but also business-orientated websites that were highlighting what each and every one of us basically did. Now, what happened in the 1990s and 2000s is really a lot of the terms that we talk about in cybersecurity today, they emerged during this period. So it was a period of rapid evolution within computing. Now, some of these terms are familiar to you guys, but I just thought I'd highlight them as well here. Phishing. You can see the little fish that I put in the background here is really a description of a socially engineered attack that looks for sensitive information. And this was primarily done through email and also for different types of web services. This has evolved into the email being the primary target for phishing worldwide, and I'll go into that a little bit later on. The term malware also entered our vocabulary. Malware is a software that's designed to harm or exploit a computer system and do a specific thing. The word firewall emerged also. So this is a protective mechanism that basically protects all of our computers and the data that we hold on our computers. The term denial of service entered our vocabulary as well. I'll go into this a little bit more in detail, but basically it's a cyber attack that floods the system with lots and lots of traffic. And actually the word spam also originates from the 1990s and the early 2000s. So fast forward a little bit more. I'm going to take a jump here now with some 25 years further. Where are we now? Nowadays, we see a cyber attack somewhere in the world every 30 seconds, and this is on average and does vary across the world. 600 million cyber attacks are conducted daily. 450,000 new malware are detected daily, and some 30,000 websites are hacked daily. Now, this information I've taken from two different reports, one from the Microsoft Digital Defense Report and one from McAfee's annual report. So these are estimations on where we sit today, but a very, very long way away from where we were back in the 1970s when computing first began. So what does this mean for us in travel? It means for us in travel that obviously we are just as susceptible to cybersecurity attacks as any other industry. In this next bit, I'm going to be going through some of the biggest topics, for instance, the motivations for attacks in tourism, the most common types of attacks in tourism, and also where our weakest links might lie. I've then taken a look at the Nordic conundrum and why we, particularly in the Nordics and the Arctic region, are so lucrative to those cyber criminals worldwide. And then I'm going to finish off with a little bit on SMEs. So what are the main motivations for cyber attacks in tourism? Well, by far the biggest one is the financial gain. People want money. And this is normally done in tourism through the compromisation of payment details or credit card details, or through ransoms. The second biggest part is the personal data theft. We are very susceptible in the tourism industry to housing a lot of personal data about our customers, but also about our employees. And this makes us lucrative targets to cyber criminals to basically get a lot of information about who's visiting us, but also who's working for us. When we start to look at DDoSs, so larger kind of traffic-based attacks, here we're looking at really chaos and disruption as the main motivations, and sometimes they're geopolitical hacks as well. So I mentioned here that in the video that you'll all get later, there was an example, for instance, with a hack on several European airports this summer. That is a DDoS attack that is designed to basically cause complete disruption during the busiest season across Europe. And that hit, for instance, Heathrow in London, it hits Brussels, it hit Berlin, but it also hit smaller airports like Vienna. And then maybe overlooked sometimes in the tourism industry, we also sometimes have a business motivation, and this might not be necessarily an illegal thing that we do, but it does also compromise our systems. And that's really the competitor insight that comes from business motivations through scraping and accessing computer systems of our competitors when we're starting to look at what others are doing in our industry. So those are the three motivations, but by far the strongest one is the financial gain that cyber criminals can get through the tourism industry. So what kind of breaches are most common in the travel and tourism industry? Well, the first one is the one that comes from the 1990s, so that phishing attack. And the reason this is the most common attack is because it can hit anybody. It can hit any one of your employees. It can also hit your customers. And in its very essence, phishing is a deceptive communication, so it's usually sent by email, but there are also text and website examples of this, designed to steal some sort of information or implant some sort of malware on your system. Now, there are several different types of phishing. I'm sure we've all heard of kind of the mass phishing, the email phishing, where you get mass emails sent out to a bunch of people asking to reset passwords, for instance, for big brands. You then have something called spear phishing, which is becoming more and more common, where you're actually sent an email that is personalized to you, so it starts to look more authentic, asking for the same. Whaling is something that is targeting your executive teams and higher management, looking for kind of payment details, particularly of individuals that might have access to larger sums of money. So, for instance, a CEO payment authorization request could be a type of whaling. Then you have smishing and vishing. So smishing is where you're being phished through an SMS. Vishing is where you're being phished through some sort of voice communication, and also nowadays video communication. And then you have clone phishing, which is basically where somebody intercepts a real email and puts in a backlink that is fake and leads you to some sort of malicious content. Then the second type that hits the tourism industry often is the ransomware attack. We mentioned SAS here. Qantas had a similar case. It's also in this video that I mentioned. And Marriott, same thing. And this is essentially a malware that is encrypted, designed to steal or leak some sort of data from the organization. And is a particularly bad kind of attack for the tourism industry because it often hits our reputation severely. Attackers often combine two different types of extortion here. So they, first of all, ask for money to basically be able to restore the systems. And then secondly, they ask for money so that they don't publish all of the stolen data that they've taken. Looking at the tourism industry, we rely on always on systems because we're a 24-hour organization and ecosystem, which means that our systems, when they're down, leads to a lot of manual process and customer frustration, not to mention employee frustration. We're also very sensitive to that personal data. So often the ransomware attacks in tourism are two-pronged as a result. And we are also very interconnected as an industry to other parts of the industry, which means that with every ransomware attack, we're also at risk of potentially leaking other systems data and this cascading through the entire vendor chain. And the final one is really that chaotic disruptive attack, where it's called a DDoS, a disturbed denial of service, where a cyber attack is basically designed to overwhelm a website with lots and lots of traffic. Or a specific type of server, like for instance, a check-in server in airports. This normally means to the website or the actual application crashing completely. So again, manual processes and lots of frustrated customers and employees. But more than that, this disruption normally has not only a financial implication, but it also can disrupt the entire chain of tourism. So this is why, for instance, DDoS attacks are quite common when it comes to airports and it comes to airlines, because it then affects the rest of the entire tourism chain as well. So those are the three most common attacks that we see in travel and tourism. So where are the weakest links and why is it that we are targeted with this? Well, we all know that the tourism is the most fragmented industry in the world. It's also the largest industry in the world. For tourism experiences to happen, several businesses need to interact in order for the customer to get from A to B, to arrive in destination, to maybe do their activities and then leave as well. So we're interconnected as an industry and cannot just rely on one piece, but have to make sure that we rely on our partners as well. Now, all of these tourism businesses across the chain are targets, and this is something that often gets overlooked. We all house personal data for customers. We also often all house some sort of payment data for customers, whether we're small, medium, large, or extra large, working on an international basis or just a domestic basis. We are all targets of some sort. We are also all interconnected, and we also rely often-wise, especially in the Arctic region, on international operators that might also have their own connections. So not only are we targets front on to our own businesses, but we also have a back door that is open to the rest of the world when it comes to where those attacks can come from. Now, just to give you an example of what a digital kind of landscape might look like for a tourism organization, I've taken an example here of an attraction and highlighted some of the types of systems that could become an entry point for an attack. So first of all, we're an IoT-rich industry. So we have loads of different devices that kind of operate simultaneously to make that tourism experience happen. We rely on distribution technology, both for domestic as well as international travel, from several different operators. We have management technology. We have MarTech, often marketing, social media platforms, and so forth. We often have several payment systems. So we have online payment systems, we have POSs, we have even manual payment systems. We have finance systems that correlate all of the payments into one place and start to send out invoices. We have several different communication platforms, both internal as well as external. We often have several databases also for customer data. So we might have a mother center for most of our customer data, but our partners as well as also subsystems often house also that customer data in some form or another. We have several Wi-Fi connections, particularly in the Nordics and in the Arctic region. We are all connected and know that our customers want to have good, speedy Wi-Fi. And then we also have surveillance which is an entry point in itself. So quite a mad map of different types of technologies and also entry points entering the tourism business. And then when you multiply this by the industry itself, we start to really build a huge web of different types of technologies working together. In the travel and tourism industry, perhaps the most susceptible to and most vulnerable to attacks is the hotel. And the reason for this is that hotels tend to accumulate the most valuable data for any one attack. So with, for instance, airlines, you often have passenger details and things like that. But for instance, passports are normally kept on a completely different system, whereas in hotels, we often kind of try and get everything into one place. So things like names, birthdays, credit cards, phone numbers, addresses, travel patterns, what somebody likes to eat, what somebody doesn't like to eat, work emails and personal emails often congregated in one place, passport details, and much, much more. Details about your children, details about your partner, details about your company, all of this housed in one database of some sort. So this is also worth bearing in mind, and this is from a global perspective, not necessarily a Nordic perspective. So onto the Nordic conundrum. 86% of total revenue in the Nordic travel and tourism market will be generated digitally by 2030. Now, we are a very digitally savvy part of the world. We have invested a lot in making sure that our customers can reach us digitally, that they can make their bookings digitally, that they can amend their bookings digitally. And we are potentially one of the leaders in Europe when it comes to the digitalization of our markets. This in itself means that we are also more available, if we put it that way. And it's not to scare anybody, but it is something that we should be aware of, that with digitalization comes the need for cybersecurity. We also have a huge amount of high-end tourism, and this is something that I wanted to highlight to everybody, because particularly the Arctic region is very lucky in that high-end tourism is a very large segment for you. However, it does make you incredibly lucrative to cyber criminals, particularly looking for that financial motivation in their hacks. We also have a luxury segment that is becoming more and more digital. So we're potentially leading the world in the digitalization of luxury travel, which means that not only do we attract a lot of high-end tourism, but we are also making that high-end tourism very digital. And we are also a very seasonal destination. So the relationship between seasonal tourism and cyber attacks is well documented around the world. When you look at it from kind of the bad guys' perspective, we are, as an industry, easier to predict and plan for attacks, knowing that, for instance, the winter is the most prominent season, for instance, in the Arctics. This means it's also easier for us to kind of think about how to make that attack very targeted throughout the entire year, but also making sure that when it comes to the seasonal aspect, that we're not necessarily on guard either, because we're incredibly busy looking after all of those customers. From a seasonal perspective, there's the other side as well, that we are very reliant on seasonal workers in our region. So it means that it's harder to control protocols with all of the seasonal workers. So we all know that when our seasonal workers arrive for the season, they go through training. It's often quite manic, and then all of a sudden you're in the season. So maintaining protocols of cybersecurity is harder when you don't have like an established workforce that's there all year round and the same all year round, that you can update on security protocols across the year. Seasonal staffing also, when it comes to remote access, looking at how we kind of move around, and remote working has become more and more common in the tourism industry, increases that risk, particularly for phishing attacks. And then there's the SME, so the small, medium-sized enterprise. Now, 80% of tourism businesses worldwide are considered SMEs by the World Travel and Tourism Council. In the Nordic region, the European Commission and OECD generally kind of think it's around about 90%. So we have a very high concentration of small, medium-sized enterprises in our region, which is worth also bearing in mind. Now, looking at attacks, the ones that we've gone through here up until now are all ones that are either on a global scale or affect global companies like airlines, like airports, like big international chains. When it comes to the SME, we are just as susceptible to those attacks, but it's much, much harder to find data on them. So I've taken some data that might give us an idea on how many attacks actually hit the SME market annually. So if we look at 50% of businesses in the Nordics have suffered a cyber attack in the past year, and this is coming from a Finnish organization called liitto. They actually have a cybersecurity conference starting today, which is very interesting. That would indicate that 50% of all businesses basically sit within this. In the UK, they've been a little bit more detailed, and they reckon that 1 in 2 small businesses have a cyber breach. MasterCard also suggests that around about 46% of small businesses globally suffered cybersecurity issues in 2024. So if we take this data as something to kind of lean on, we're looking at around about 50% of all SMEs having had some sort of cybersecurity issues in recent years. And I think this is worth mentioning that, you know, it's not just the big guys, it's also the smaller guys that are attractive to cyber criminals. And if this is the kind of figure that we're looking at, then 1 in 2 of us is vulnerable, basically. So summarizing this piece, the real risk for Arctic Europe and the Nordics in general, but particularly Arctic Europe, which is heavily, heavily seasonal, is that we have a high reliance on digital tourism, which is both a very, very good thing because it means we can access our customers much better and they can book and it's much smoother. But at the same time, we are also easier to access for cyber criminals. We're known as a high-end destination with the Northern Lights, fantastic tours. We're also known as an expensive destination. So we're lucrative to cyber criminals trying to get the details of those customers that have the disposable income to travel to the Nordics. But also the types of people that come to us. We have a lot of celebrities. We have a lot of luxury travel. These are individuals that cyber criminals really want also personal data from. We're reliant on seasonal patterns for travel, so we're easier to target. So, for instance, during our winter period in the Arctics, we are probably more susceptible to those attacks than any other time of the year. They're easier to plan for. We know that there's more customers in-house, more customers traveling to the region, and they are often of that high-end demographic. And we have a high concentration of SMEs, which means that not necessarily everybody has the ability for robust systems, which leaves us kind of unprotected, but also is a really good thing to highlight because there's a lot that we can do to protect and help protect our SMEs from cyber attacks. So, how am I doing on time, Marika?
You're doing great. We still have, to be very accurate, 24 minutes to go.
Okay, super. So if I take a pause here, obviously we've now gone through the history of cybersecurity. We've gone through what these cyber criminals are looking for. We've also gone through what types of cybersecurity attacks are most common in travel and tourism and why we're vulnerable as an Arctic Nordic region. Now, the next piece is really about what's coming. So we all know about AI. I'm sure most of you have been on some sort of AI courses, and I know that Marika has a fantastic lineup also for this week. This is a new technology that is affecting also the cybersecurity space and is worth bearing in mind when we start to think about how can we use AI in different ways. Now, obviously, it's not just us thinking about this. AI is something that the cyber criminals are also thinking about. How can they start to use AI in their attacks? So we're going to deep dive into this next. So starting off with the bad guys, AI-powered cyber attacks are on the increase. Now, I've taken out 3 of the biggest kind of issues maybe that have been reported this year. And this is again coming from Microsoft. But there are many, many different types of AI-powered cyber attacks. There was a total list of 12. But perhaps we focus on these and we try and see if we can get these under control first. Now, the first one is the hyper-realistic phishing attack. Now, we mentioned the phishing attack is one that targets often emails, can target also text messages, can also be visual, so in the form of some sort of video or voice. These are becoming more and more realistic as cyber criminals start to use generative AI to generate those emails. Now, this is not just in terms of kind of personalization, where that email comes to you in a more personalized form, but also in terms of content. The content of these emails start to become more realistic. You start to believe in what this email is saying much, much more. And also there is the ability to send more of these, several of these. So especially for us in tourism who deal with a lot of requests from around the world every single day, this is something to be aware of, as these attacks are on the rise and they are much, much more realistic than what they have ever been before. Now, the other one that is on the rise, and this has to do with the rise of VLMs during this year. So for those of you who don't know what a VLM is a visual learning module. So up until now, we've been talking a lot about language learning modules that generate text. You'll have noticed on the biggest kind of generative AI platforms like ChatGPT, like Google's Gemini, like Microsoft's Copilot. Now, when you put in a prompt, you also get diagrams. You get, you can ask for audio, a recital of what you've just asked for, so that the AI starts to talk to you. You can also start to create videos much, much better than before. So this poses a risk as well that voice deepfakes and video deepfakes are likely to become more commonplace also for our industry, where we don't really know, is this voice real? Is this video real? Or is it something that has been generated by an AI to create some sort of cyber attack against you? Now, maybe the voice is the most concerning, because this might be in a reception. For instance, you pick up the phone and sensitive customer details can be very easily kind of leaked if you're not aware of this. Voice generation is very realistic. And when you're in that stressed out moment where you have hundreds of customers in your lobby, it can be much, much easier to intercept as well those customer details through voice than ever before. Video, I think, is still something that is a bit of a kind of, it's not as commonplace in the tourism industry, but videos, for instance, are starting to be used more and more so in email communication, where you have an individual that basically talks to you, tells you a little bit about the destination, might tell you a little bit about what they're booking. These videos, when they start to ask for sensitive information, might also become something to be aware of, and know that these deepfakes are out there. And the final piece that is actually happening on the kind of cyber criminal side is the AI assisted malware. So as many of you know, generative AI is also able to create code, and very well so. So as these generative AI models become more and more sophisticated and kind of start to think about more sophisticated systems that they can pump out in just a couple of minutes, one of those systems that they're also looking at, particularly from the criminal side, is malware. What kind of ransomware can they create that can disrupt the entire tourism industry in one go, for instance? So in a nutshell, attacks are becoming more convincing with higher success rates because the content is also more realistic. Attacks are becoming faster and cheaper to run because you can do loads of these at once in just seconds. Detection is harder because we as human beings obviously need to kind of adjust to understanding what is the new, so that we can detect, you know, what kind of new hyper-realistic phishing attacks, for instance, are hitting our organizations. And there is new malware out there. So if you remember right at the beginning of this presentation, I spoke about 450,000 new malware being created daily. That is heavily connected to the rise of AI. But it's not just bad news. AI-powered protection is also becoming something that we can really look at. And I think this is a space that is not just for the big guys, but also for the small guys. So now we can start to think about, how do we conduct our cyber hygiene, for instance, with the help of AI. So many who use AI on a daily basis use it almost like a personal assistant. You can actually ask these locked in, hopefully company only, AI assistants to help you with your cyber hygiene, for instance. Have I updated all of my passwords this week? Have I got any programs still open that need to be closed down at the end of the day? Another thing that we can start to look at, and this is really from the technology side, but this is also something that is evolving at a rapid pace, is smart firewalls and intrusion prevention that is being created with the help of AI. So this is where we're starting to look at big security firms, like for instance McAfee, using AI to help them generate the next firewall. What is going to be the next technology that's going to protect our industry? So they're doing a lot of that. AI enhanced password security, I kind of mentioned it already. Password security is something that every individual in the tourism industry needs to take very, very seriously. This talks about, for instance, creating pass keys instead of passwords, updating passwords on a regular basis. I'll go into this a little bit more tomorrow. But making sure that maybe AI is involved there. So rather than just using your grandma's birthday and then using your grandpa's birthday and then using your brother's birthday and then using all of your kids' birthday as your password, you can ask AI to create more secure passwords for all of those password updates, and also to help you to create pass keys if you're already there. Deepfake detection and identity protection. So one of the good things about VLMs now is that you can actually use it in two ways. So you can create videos, you can create images, but you can also ask generative AI modules to interpret images. So where is this image taken from, for instance? So they can help you detect deepfakes. So whenever you receive a video or an email or something like that that has an image that looks real, but you're not quite sure, you can actually ask AI to help you also detect whether this is fake or whether it's real. You can also ask AI to help you with phishing and scam email detection. So taking a look at those texts that actually, is this real, or has a human written this to me? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong? Can you help me spot the difference between kind of a good URL, a bad URL, and so on? So actually, there's a lot that we can also educate our teams on when it comes to detecting scam emails, phishing emails, and also those deep fakes in the visual department. And then obviously you can also now start to think about AI-powered threat detection. This is again going back to those security firms. What kind of AI-powered threat detection could you employ, for instance, into your businesses to protect the entire crowd? So a lot that we can do ourselves, but a lot that also the security firms themselves are using this new technology for. Now, this is actually something that came out of a report in Stanford on what should we be doing to make sure that we're kind of on top of this AI and all of these new threats, but also understanding what we can do with this new technology. One of the biggest trends this year and also last year has been the rise of the travel bot. So whether that's a bot on your own website or one that's being used by your third-party distributor or one that's being used by any service provider connected to you, we need to be babysitting our bots. So what's going on with the bots? What kind of prompts are coming in? Are there ridiculous things that are being requested of us? Are there spikes in specific questions? Are we being targeted with that DDoS in our bots? Like, are we actually getting real questions, or are we getting fake questions, especially if they start to come in en masse? The other thing that we need to start looking at is website vigilance and understanding spikes on our website. So we have a natural curve on how customers enter our websites and monitoring that traffic. Vigilance when it comes to big spikes, but also big periods where there's no traffic, are worth taking into consideration when it comes to AI, as we don't really know how they can intercept those websites yet and what kind of traffic they could start to send to us. Now, I was in Norway, for instance, last week, where I was talking to one of the big infrastructure players, where the expectation is that with the rise of AI, there's going to be more DDoS attacks, so attacks that flood your website with lots and lots of traffic. So when you start to see those big spikes, it's good as the human to start asking, is this real or is this not, or am I under some sort of attack? Think about emails. Think about emails both in terms of what you can do to decipher your own emails with the help of AI, but also otherwise. And think about those emails as becoming more real. So understanding that actually phishing attacks have changed already and that they no longer look like what they would have done back in the 1990s. I showed you an image of one specific tourism company when it came to their mapping of tech. So this is something that I recommend all companies do on some level, whether you're small, medium, large, and all the rest of it. And most of you have probably done it already, is to have a map of all of the technology that connects to your business. So whether that's something that's a third party, or whether that's a security system, or whether that's a surveillance system, whether that's just a piece of IoT that is connected to the Wi-Fi. I'll give you an example. For instance, MGM over in Vegas had a really big attack 3 years ago, a ransomware attack, where they were basically hacked through a fish tank that was connected to the Wi-Fi. So IoT is something that is worth looking at and thinking about, that all of the devices that you have within your organization, that they're mapped out somehow. Where could these attacks come from? And also inspecting your integration. So many of us have had integrations with other companies for several years. Those integrations are good to revisit now and just double check what kind of security sits in those integrations to avoid cascades and attacks spreading, and you also having that backdoor entered somehow. And that kind of leads me to the end of what I'm talking about today. So the AI piece is something that is obviously going to evolve. I will be taking a little bit more of a look at it tomorrow, particularly what the SME can do alone and on their own with free tools. And on that note, this is a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be looking at tomorrow. So cybersecurity is something that we talk about a lot of the time being something that attacks our business. It also attacks our customers through our business, but actually our customers are also at threat just on their own. So we're going to be taking a look at how to protect our customers and how to also educate our customers on remaining digitally savvy in destination, en route, and all the way through their travel. And then we're going to be taking a deeper dive into how to protect the SME and what kind of tips and tricks can be used essentially by everybody, whether this is an individual working with their own company or whether this is a team, how we educate our teams on doing things the same way and correctly and following that cybersecurity protocol, and also how we can take some of those tips and tricks and move it into the larger organizations, into those medium-sized organizations, into those larger organizations, just as good cyber hygiene. And that'll be my session basically for tomorrow, and I hope that you all join. And I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Nikki.
I speak a bit like a machine gun, don't I?
But it was really easy to listen. I love it how you make it very practical and understandable, and you put it into the scale of tourism and also to us where we are located. Yeah. Well, first of all, everyone who is in the webinar at the moment, please take a look at the chat box as I just popped in the link where you can sign up for the other Tech Week topics and webinars we have from Arctic Europe Tourism Cluster this week. So clicking the link, make sure to register, so that way you will receive all of these recordings and materials to your email. But worry not, because all of the recordings will be also gathered to Arctic Europe Tourism Cluster's YouTube channel, so they can be later on viewed freely from there. For the tomorrow's workshop, we will also record that, as it will be a workshop where, Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, but you will be doing like a step-by-step guide, and none of you participants, you don't have to share anything what you don't want to online for the audience. So Nikki's just going to give you simple pathways how you can practically approach this very highly important topic in your everyday working life. And it's a lot of comments coming up that this was really interesting. And again, there were questions about the recordings. Yes, all of the AETC Tech Week webinars will be recorded. In total, there are 8 of them this week. So it's quite of an extravaganza, but recorded for later on viewing. So even though that there are workshop parts in all of the webinars what we have, but those are the kinds that you can also participate later on when viewing and just following the webinar step-by-step guidance for the workshop. Yeah, Kimmo is now also mentioning that everyone calls me Nikki unless I'm in trouble, and I do believe that I introduced you with your full name in the beginning as well. But by no means, you're not in trouble. I just think that this was brilliant. But everyone, if you have questions for Nikki at the moment, please go ahead. You can open up your microphones if you want to shout it out loud for all of us to hear, or then you can use the chat box, or you can maybe have a little time to digest this, and maybe you have the questions for her tomorrow.
Very good. Marika, I will say also, I will send you the video so that everybody can watch the video as well separately, so that we have that separate to the recording. Good.
Perfect. Yes. Now we have a question from Martin. Will you give us recommendations on antivirus softwares?
I can't do that because I don't work for those companies, unfortunately, but I will give you guidelines on what you might want to look out for in that software.
Yeah. And then Kimmo is asking that which AIs would you recommend to use for enhancing cybersecurity and reviewing emails and photos and these in general?
Well, I think at the moment it's the bigger LLMs, to be honest, that have the ability to cipher enough data to give you the right kind of information. But one of the things I'll be going through tomorrow is that if you are using AI to recommend on how to protect, always ask for a source and go and check out the direct website where that source has come from, because they're still learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Let
me just browse. Let me just browse through. Is there something that popped? Yeah. Let me see. Okay. So also now in the chat box, you can see the direct link to our YouTube channel. So we will do a bundle of all the Tech Week material, both the recordings and other material that our wonderful experts will share with everyone. So we will give you those. And for the material, especially, you need to be registered on the link above you can see in the chat box in order to also receive that material. But recordings you can find very easily on the YouTube channel just as soon as we are uploading them there. There is a question, speaking of data analyzing and spikes in general in traffic, will detecting and fighting of this will be covered in the workshop? So something about tomorrow's workshop.
Yes, briefly. So tomorrow's workshop really is something for everybody. So I've tried to make sure that this session today and tomorrow interconnect so that you can get something back from as an individual as well as a small business and also a larger business or an individual working in a larger business. So we're going to be covering data in general as part of tomorrow's workshop. And how to detect spikes as well. And what kind of systems that you should already actually have attached to your website so that you can kind of monitor traffic.
Very good.
Good.
I do believe that we really need to be updated, myself included, like having a little bit of a workflow for yourself in your everyday working life on what you need to remember. It's so easy to just, like you mentioned within your presentation, Nikki, that like just logging off from your software and programs, what you're using. So that will make you vulnerable if you don't have like a routine for those, and also very important to your stuff as well. So it's many of them are simple things, which is easy to forget, and then also a lot of things that we might not be even aware of or remember what we should do. Yes.
Very good.
Okay, now's your final time to pop some questions if you have to Nikki. We have a few minutes of our reserved time still available here if you'd have any specifics for her.
Can I ask a question of everybody? Can you stick your hand up in the air if you feel like cybersecurity is more understood now and the importance of it? Good.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of hands raising up. Very good.
Fabulous. Then it's mission accomplished for today, and I hope you will join me tomorrow morning for some practical tips and tricks.
That's perfect. And even also, I'm noticing that we have quite a lot of people online. So also a link to our project, if you might not be yet that familiar what the Arctic Europe Tourism Cluster is all about. So here you can stop by and have a look what our EU-funded project is up to. But without further ado, I do believe that it is 11 o'clock in Finland, 10 o'clock in Sweden and Norway. And it is time to give a lot of thank yous to Nikki and all of you participating, and hope to see many of you tomorrow online with Nikki on the workshop. But a reminder as well that Swedish Norwegian time 1 o'clock, Finnish time 2 o'clock, we will dive into another topic within the Tech Week with Flowhouse and Ville Niemijärvi. He is an expert when it comes to artificial intelligence and in tourism.
Wonderful.
But thank you, everyone, and hope to see you online many times this week.
Thank you, everybody. Tack, tack. Kiitos.
Thank you.
Thank you.